The railroad itself, when it was completed, it ran all the way from Bear Harbor all the way up to Moody, which was a town with a bar and a hotel and a livery stable. And finally, it went along Indian Creek here to what is now known as Andersonia. We'll learn why it's called Andersonia in a minute. And that's about 17 and a half miles. It was probably one of the hardest 17 and a half miles of railroad ever built. So taking it in chronological order, before there ever was a railroad there, they were using horses to truck the tan oak bark out. But when they started getting serious about cutting down the redwoods, they decided that they needed to have some way of getting into all this area here. Again, this is Bear Harbor here, Piercy up there, and halfway along was Moody. And so the deal was they started off with a short spur, a 2 mile spur, just along the tracks, and that was actually called the Bear Harbor and Eel River Railroad at a time when they thought that they may be able to have actually got through Shelter Cove and into the eventually into Humboldt Bay that way. Well, that never transpired. Let's take a look at Bear Harbor itself here. It's barely a harbor. It's an indentation, I would say, rather than a harbor. And here it is, and if you look at the at the top there, there's one of the few traces of the Bear Harbor Railroad left in the form of these rails sticking out of the cliff. So there were at least 3 attempts at building a wharf here, but you can see how tricky it is. This is all low water. There are rocks here, so they had to build the wharf about 200 yards out. The original wharf was a lot shorter. And this is where I think the one day of this whole saga that I would have loved to have been there and seen it was when they brought a 12-ton locomotive on a steamer. It had been built in San Francisco. It was brought up on a steamer, and it was somehow they got it onto the extension of the railroad here. Now, there was no real wharf. What I believe happened, I haven't been able to find any proof of this, was that it was brought in on a flying fox on a cable, but a 12-ton locomotive, hanging over these rocks and over the ocean. It must have been a sight to behold. That's the locomotive that, after a lot of work on it, now it has its home at Fort Humboldt. And are they still running the third weekend of them, or the third Sunday of the month? They were running 2 locomotives out there. The Bear Harbor #1 and the Falk, and we'll be talking about the Falk locomotive. In fact, most of this talk is going to be about the locomotives, because I never saw a steam train I didn't want to play with, ride on, pull the whistle on, do everything. So here we are. This is pretty much all that you can see if you go to Bear Harbor now. But back in, you can see, this is a harbor. Okay. So this is the classic photographs that you always see, and anyone talking about the Bear Harbor Railroad. This is, it's 1,900 feet long. That's about a third of a mile, but it's an incline. It goes up 600 feet. This is a 1 and 3 incline here. So the deal was they would run skips or trucks along the rail, and then it's split into two. So there'd be a loaded rail car coming down, an empty rail car coming up. So gravity would do its thing, and you would conquer this 600-foot incline here. This was built after they had brought the locomotive ashore. They built the locomotive in 1882. They brought it ashore in 83, and then it was working for about 20 years. It started off just hauling tan bark, and I think the next. This is this now. So as you can see, there isn't a whole lot left of it. As they say, Mother Nature bats last. Once they got the railroad to Moody, now that's from the shore just to Moody. That's about 10 miles. They were still another nearly 10 miles short of getting it to the Eel River, and that was the hardest part. There were dozens of these trestles. Some of them were 300 or 400 feet long. There's a tunnel there. I think it's about a 400-foot tunnel. It was extremely expensive, extremely hard. It took them 3 or 4 years to just build the final 8 or 10 miles of railroad here. This is Bear Harbor. I'm guessing this would have been about 1990, and I believe, what did I say, 1890? Keep me honest here, thank you. And I believe what we're seeing here is whole skids of tan bark. This was before the Bryceland extraction plant got going. That was active from about 1902 for about 20 years. But before then, they would ship the actual the bark itself. After the Bryceland extraction plant was built, and there was another extraction plant in the Mattole Valley, they would take the bark, they would leave it to sit for about a year, then they would put it through a series of acid baths, and they would end up with this molasses-like, very acidic, thick mixture that they would put into 50-gallon barrels. And from Bryceland, for instance, they would take it by horse over the hill. If you've driven from Bryceland or from Redway to Shelter Cove, you have to go up and then you go down. And then they would ship it. There was a decent wharf at Shelter Cove in the 1900s. Ship it down to San Francisco in its finished form. So, this was a going concern here. When they were building the railroad, there were about 200 workers building the railroad. And, you've got to appreciate the optimism of these guys. That and it was guys who thought that they could make their fortunes by first with the tan oak and then what was called the red gold of Humboldt and Mendocino County, the redwoods. They succeeded far more than I think any of us would have liked. They ended up taking something like 95% of the virgin redwoods, cutting them, and most of it ended up in San Francisco, especially after the earthquake, to rebuild there. My feeling about that is it's a terrible tragedy that 95% of the redwoods were cut. On the other hand, there is 5% left. It was nearly nothing. And you can read about it in my books, as a matter of fact, or if you, there have been all sorts of histories of how the redwood forests were decimated. So that was the going concern here. Okay, so this was the railroad was run by first local people. It went through several changes of ownership, both the railroad and that 20 square miles of redwood and tan oak. But then in about 1902, 5 investors from Aberdeen in Washington State bought them out, one of whom was Henry Neff Anderson. And it's from him that we get the name Andersonia, which is today is just two or three homes still left in Andersonia, about a mile north of Piercy on 101, on the west side of the main fork of the Eel. So Anderson, he was the president, and he had big plans. He was the one who arranged for who paid for the railroad to be extended from Moody, if you remember, that's halfway along, to what is now 101, to the main fork of the Eel. He was the one who built a mill. It's at the time it was called, or soon after, it was called the $1 Million Mill that never milled. And he also built a dam across Indian Creek with the pond, but behind it was enough to hold about 3 months worth of logs ready for the mill. If you see here, the dam was 32 feet high and 80 feet wide. That's a serious dam. We talked about the tan oak. So here's the tan oak in barrels, 50-gallon barrels, along with the deer. I trust the deer has seen better days before that. Anyway, so that's why they would do it. These wire cables. I call them flying foxes. What do you call them here? That's a Kiwi term, but anyway, cables. I think there's a fancy name. Okay, so he built this huge mill, or they were still in the process of building the mill, and late October 1905, here's Neff Anderson. He comes down to supervise the finishing off the sawmill, and it's about to start operations. They've actually got a huge amount of logs already in the in the pond, ready to go into the mill. And there was a problem with one of the beams. It was too low, so they were using a donkey engine to lift it up. It slipped, hit Neff Anderson on the back of his head. He refused to be taken to hospital in San Francisco, and he died a week later. And his death really saw the end of the whole enterprise. 6 months later, was it April the 18th, 1906? Have I got the date right? Was the San Francisco earthquake, which was felt here. It damaged the dam. It also brought landslides down onto the railroad. Not only that, but after Neff had died, his previous wife got into a tussle with the children of his second wife got into a tussle with the children of his first marriage, and everything was held up legally. There was a huge winter storm which took out the newly built wharf. I think this was like the fourth wharf they built at Bear Harbor. And there was I read some cryptic delay of machinery to be delivered. So one way and another, by the time the San Francisco earthquake happened and really damaged this, it was game over for the $1 million mill that never milled. And as you see, that this photograph was taken in the 1930s. And this was pretty well what was left of it. I think this is Reese Hughes, the hiker. I think that's Reese, or maybe he took the photo. Excuse me, I don't know. Anyway, this was just left to the elements, and the locomotive itself. Hang on. Okay, this is Andersonia now. Not much left. It's a flat where Indian Creek meets the main fork of the Eel. This is Neff Anderson's house. Jerry Rhodey took this photograph in 2007. So I hate to think what's left of it now. I've tried to get over there. Louisa and I have had 2 tries to get onto Andersonia. There's a major gate across the. There's a bridge across, but there's a major gate and all sorts of trespassers will be shot on sight signs and everything else. So I think Jerry was probably one of the last civilians, as it were, to get into the site. Okay, let's just talk for a minute about Bear Harbor number 1. So the great-grandson of Neff Anderson rediscovered, I don't know if it was really lost, but anyway, he rediscovered this locomotive in the 1940s. It was under a shed, but the shed had collapsed on top of it. It was all overgrown. And Howie, you were saying
I was mistaken.
You took. Oh.
I was thinking of the other locomotive you mentioned earlier.
Oh, the Falk.
I was misremembering stories.
Okay. Anyway, this is a flash photograph because everything was so covered. It was apparently thick. The forest had taken over. So here it is, and we'll talk a little bit about why it's so special in a minute. So make sure that I've covered the demise of the tracks. In the 1930s, the tracks themselves were removed, scrap tracks having a value, and everything else was just allowed to go to rack and ruin. Apparently, it's barely hikeable, the route of it. You had to have a machete to get through now. Reese Hughes went through there about 10 years ago with some folks. But so I'm going to be talking about the locomotive. So any questions about the railroad itself at this point? Okay, so the locomotive itself, I think we have the, but by the way, this is how it was found in this shed that was collapsing here. So, whoops, hang on. Okay, so the locomotive was built in San Francisco, 1882. It was shipped up and somehow gotten onto this, what was originally 2 miles of rail and then 10 miles to Moody via the incline, and finally 17.5 miles all the way to Andersonia. And it's a very special type of locomotive. There are only 20 of these built. It's a true gypsy locomotive, and it's called a gypsy. I don't know why the name, but gypsies have this. It's a combined locomotive and a hauler. Until Dolbear had perfected the donkeys, one of which you can see if you drive to the Samoa Cookhouse, just as you come off the road going up North Spit. If you look to the left, you'll see one of Dolbear's donkey engines. But that had to wait. That was about 1992 that they started building those. Until then, they were hauling logs by taking the locomotive along to as close as they could to where the logs need to be hauled. And then this is a winch. And it's a winch which has got quite a complicated gearing back to, there's one cylinder here and another cylinder on the far side. And here's where this is the capstan that you would wrap the probably wire cable around. And so the locomotive would be still, it would be chocked on a track, and it would then be used to haul logs. 20 of these, and only 20 were built. This is called a true gypsy because its cylinders directly drive the bull wheel. That's the one with the cogs on it, which then drives the capstan. The Falk locomotive, which is the other one out at Fort Humboldt, thank you. I was trying to think Humboldt. It's similar, but it's different in that it has a third cylinder. So instead of having this elaborate gearing, it was built about the same time, 2 years after the Bear Harbor number one. And there are more of those around. This is the only one of the 20 ever built that is still a working locomotive. So let's talk about it. Here it is on one of the steam up days. I think I took that about 10 years ago. So they steam it up the third Sunday of the Susan's nodding there. And we've got to say this isn't exactly original. They had to replace the boiler. There were a lot of parts that had to be replaced or or cleaned up. What happened was Neff Anderson's great-grandson, as they say, either found it or was told where it was, and he arranged for it to be, and this was in the 1950s, and he arranged for it to be shipped to Fort Humboldt. And at that time, the predecessor of the Timber Heritage, thank you, Association, which was the Northern California Lumber, come on folks, anyway, it was the
Northern Counties Logging Interpretive Association.
I am indebted to you.
NCLIA.
Got it, yeah. So anyway, that morphed into the Timber Heritage Association. But anyway, they cut their teeth in the 1970s on one of Dolbear's donkeys. And when they got their hands on this, it took them 5 or 6 years to get it to the condition that we see now. But it's a beautiful, beautiful. If anyone has a heart, you will, you got to appreciate this.
And it's still there?
And it's still there and runs every month, as far as I know.
You can't ride it, can you?
Yeah, there's a little carriage behind there. I should say something about the gauge. This is a standard gauge, 4 foot 8.5, which is the standard gauge in the Americas. In probably 60% of the world uses this 4 foot 8.5. And I used to get these memes saying, "Did you know that the reason we have 4 foot 8.5 gauge is because that's the width of 2 horses' asses?" And there's a lovely phrase I saw on. Do you know Snopes? Snopes is the checking stuff for facts. It's an online fact-checking service. And they say, for altogether trivial reasons, it's kind of sort of true. Well, there are indeed, in Pompeii, for instance, which is a major Roman city in 79 AD, right before it was covered in ash from Mount Vesuvius, there are indeed wagon wheels, and they're about 4 foot 8.5, kind of, sort of. There was no Roman standard gauge. When George Stephenson, who started the very first railroad, the Liverpool-Manchester Railroad in 1820-something, he adopted the gauge that was being used in mines at the time, which was 4 foot 8. But the mines were basically a straight line. Well, his railroad went around corners, and if he stayed with the exactly 4 foot 8, the wheels would have bound, and so he added half an inch, and that's why we have 4 foot 8.5. And when we started building railroads in this country, they were actually bringing locomotives from Britain and from Europe, which was all 4 foot 8.5. The bit of trivia that goes along with this is that if the southern states had won the war, we'd probably be using 5 foot, because they were mostly using 5 foot, although they had a slew of other gauges. In fact, according to, is it Harvey Foote, he was one of the Civil War guys on the PBS? Sheldon Foote, thank you. His opinion is that this is one reason why the South lost the war, is that they had so many different and conflicting railroad gauges. Well, the north one, the north had a standard gauge of 4 foot 8.5, and during Reconstruction, apparently the rails were very quickly adapted in the south to all be 4 foot 8.5.
Why that added half?
Because if you're going around the 4 foot 8 was for mine railroads, and they're straight. If you go around a corner, then the wheels will start binding, and George Stephenson's original railroad had a lot of bends in it, so that prevented the wheels from binding. It's nominally 4 foot 8, but let's add half an inch so the wheels don't get stuck here. So here we are with that's, they say, the builder's photo from 1882. Here it is. I think this is a photograph when it was actually running prior to the 1906. Anyway, I don't have any information about that one.
I'd like to add it quickly.
Yeah.
That the picture of that same picture is going to be on T-shirts for sale at the Salmon Oyster Barbecue.
Oh,
We've already started it.
how wonderful!
Yeah, my whole family has them already.
So, do you know the date of this? Because
That picture?
yeah, it's. I got this from the Needle Rock Visitor Center in the
I
Syncyone without any caption.
I don't recognize who it is. I'm pretty sure that picture was taken when it was at Fort Humboldt.
Yeah, because there was a gap between
Yeah.
1906 and 1972. So yeah,
Well,
I'm
yeah.
sure you're right. Yeah.
My husband, who was Grant Anderson, he was the great-grandson of Henry Neff, and he's the one that got the train out.
Got it.
He and
Yes.
Logan Coombs, anybody with trains know about Logan Coombs?
And as I understand it, he located it in the 50s, but it wasn't actually shipped up to Fort Humboldt
Well,
between
yeah.
72.
They had it running, well, they had it running, and but they had to be approved by the state. The steam and the steam,
The boil.
the state would not approve of it, so that's why the difference on the steam part of the train.
Yeah.
But it was, let's see, the mill kind of closed in what?
Well, it never did mill, did it?
Well, no, but then it was replaced. It was another mill. took
That's
it-
right. That was in the 40s, I understand.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it went into the 50s. My Grant Anderson was killed in '64. That's one of the reasons they keep talking about it. It was a poor thing. Everybody got killed on that. Yeah. So he was killed in '64, and so this train came right after that. And
Okay.
it was donated to the state, or to the Northern California, whatever.
Yeah, we got it. Northern California Lumbermen's Interpretive Association.
Northern Counties Logging Interpretation.
Yeah. And the last I knew, the state would kind of like to get rid of it to the Samoa group.
Okay.
And the Samoa group was anxious to get it.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I don't know when it'll happen,
Yeah.
but don't forget to bring money for T-shirt. It's a fundraiser.
Okay. Well, it's a beautiful photo, though. I can see.
Yeah,
That's the one that's gonna be on the shirt, that,
yeah, it's, yeah,
the one with the guy on it.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah, just-
Southern Humboldt. Okay.
I
So
don't know who-
here we go.
Do you remember,
One of these guys might know who it was.
anybody know who that man is on the
It was in the northern.
locomotive? No, I don't think.
So I just want to wind up here. Say first, it's really fun going to Fort Humboldt and seeing these two locomotives, both the Falk and the only true gypsy still running, Bear Harbor number 1.
You know,
Thanks.
there's another train being put together.
So yeah,
The
you can.
Baldwin.
Yes, yeah.
My family, I mean, I think it's my son has all the paperwork for the purchase of those two engines.
Okay,
We have tons of stuff.
okay. Oh, this is fun. This is an ongoing saga we're talking about.
Yeah,
here. Yeah. Okay. I just want to say, if you go out to Bear Harbor today, these days you can drive, kind of, sort of, to the Needle Rock Visitor Center at the north end of the Sinkyone Wilderness, and then you have to hike in. You used to be able to drive a little way, but then right now it's gated, and you can only hike in, or you can bike in, as we did.
But it only goes a certain distance.
Yeah.
After Bear Harbor, at least last year or the year before, due to winter storms, it was closed.
Oh yeah, major problems getting down the trail now. So if you do that, two things you should know. One is getting from the Usal Road, which is where if you're going to
Mendocino?
well, that's what I was going to say, and that's getting kind of complicated. If you go to the Sinkyone, the north end of the Sinkyone Wilderness, the last three miles down to the Needle Rock Visitor Center is interesting, to say the least. There's a big sign saying four-wheel drive only. We have a Volkswagen van. We had fun on that both times. The real issue is not so much getting in, because you're going downhill, but getting back out. If you meet something on the way, it's a very skimpy one-way track with virtually no passing places. You're dead, man. You know, you just have to hope that you don't meet anything. But the other thing is, on the way between Bryceland and when you get to the top of this dirt road down to Needle Rock, there's a beautiful monastery. It's a Cistercian monastery. It was started about 50 years ago by a branch of Belgian nuns, and it's really well worth driving in and appreciating it. This is the main worship room with these beautiful redwoods outside. I recommend that. This is the trail from the visitor center to Bear Harbor. Pretty trail. These guys, I think this is the morning bathroom line.
When we were there was one elk mom, and when we went to the the visitors' headquarters, the little office thing to tell them we were there and everything, the hosts said, "Be careful." Apparently that morning, earlier, 5 or 6 people were stranded over on a couple of rocks because this elk was staring at them, and they were between her and her children, elk.
And there she is,
And there she is. And then once when Barry went, we had to sleep out in, we couldn't sleep in the car, we camped. And he was bringing the tent stuff back to the van, and he was paralyzed.
I was doing this. Anyway, number 62 she is notorious there. So
We're protected.
very, yeah. And I mean, she, you think, well, she's over there, and she just, holding her in her, I'm dead, So anyway, that's number 82. That was taken with a telephoto lens, I should say.
You don't want to get too close.
No, this is from Needle Rock Visitor Center. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to visit here. This is on the way, and this is Bear Harbor again. So I'll leave you with a photograph of Bear Harbor. So, any questions?
You had a book open when you were showing some of the mail. What was that? What was the book you were using for one of your pictures?
Oh yeah, okay. So in the Humboldt room, there is a book by Stanley Borden, who is notorious for, I think he lives in Sonoma, and this is the Western Railroad Association, and they've put out a ton of these little leaflety books.
Yeah.
Anyway, there is a book there by Stanley Borden called The Bear Harbor Railroad from like the 1970s.
Yeah, I have some of his. I would go back and look.
Yeah. It was classified last time I went there. I finally found it. Yes, so probably in the right place.
Let me give you this, so our viewers at home can hear.
Okay, well, the Humboldt Historical Society, not this last issue, but the issue before, had a center page, really good story about this Andersonia and the trades.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Sir.
Here. Oh, okay. Good idea.
I would like to answer your question about why the Bear Harbor locomotive is called the Gypsy.
Oh, yes,
Now,
please.
what you referred to as the capstan,
Yes.
that's the Gypsy. And it's a name from the hardware trade. It could have been used on a locomotive, it could have been used on a dredge in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, but it was something in the stock and trade of, we'll say, rigging, and that's how it gets its name.
Okay.
Sometimes called a spool.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'd like to also mention that locomotive operates with just about 90% of its original parts. So many things get rebuilt that sometimes you wonder, what's original?
It does have a new boiler, though, am I right?
Yeah, I believe that's the one that didn't have any boiler work done on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know.
The Falk definitely has the new
Yes.
boiler, but I thought that had a new boiler, too. Okay. Okay. How are we doing? How are we doing for a time? How are we doing?
Perfect.
Are we good?
Great. Any other questions?
We did that hike years ago, and I can't remember. How much up and down is there on that hike?
Not much.
No?
It's pretty,
You want to repeat
little
your
bit
question?
rolling, that's all.
Oh, I just asked about the hike from there, whether there was a lot of up and down.
Yeah, the problem, we've been there twice. The last time was 3 years ago, and there was a lot of downed trees.
Yeah, you
Huh.
can't go very far. You can't get past Bear Harbor. You used to be able to do a 5-mile hike.
Yeah.
Well, an easy day hike back and forth.
Yeah.
But you can't, there were too many downed trees. And it was closed. And I just don't know how long it would take. They were not very optimistic about how long it would take, because it's just not high priority. That area is not visited enough. It's not like the Redwood Parks or something, you know.
They were talking about getting a CCC group down there, I think. Yeah.
There was another town on that road, on that trip, the little town of Kinney.
Oh, yeah, yes.
And when the only time I've been there, it had a tray or a dugout for water for horses.
Yeah,
That was
here's,
what- But Moody, when I saw it, it still
Here's
had a hotel.
Kenny here.
Kenny, yeah.
Really?
Had a hotel, it had several.
Had a livery stable, had a bar,
Yes,
and it had
When was
a
this?
blacksmith's smoke.
it would have been like in '56.
Because I've never even heard of the town Moody. You usually have heard of
Well, you
historic
can't
towns.
get there unless you've got right of way to get in. It's a closed road.
Uh-huh,
It's a logging road, you might say.
I see,
It was a logging road.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
I
But
imagine
Moody
it's
had a-
overgrown now.
Yeah, well, Moody, there was quite a nice hotel there, and there were the buildings. In one, there was a little cabin and it still had the pots on the stove. And they moved out when he got killed. Everybody left.
Yeah.
Sad.
Well, plus I gather that it was there was also some question about the right-of-way. That was after he was killed, a bank claimed some of what he thought was his right-of-way, what wasn't his right-of-way. There was a whole slew of things.
Yeah, I don't know.
In a 6-month period that culminated in the earthquake, and
Well, I was always told the reason they didn't go that route, the railroad, instead of up over, Bell Springs, was because of the earthquake. It took out a lot of the plans for the railroad to come through. That was what I was told.
yeah, that's what I said in my book.
Did you say that? Okay.
Which has on the back cover the
Okay.
railroad.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that even with the plans that they ever would have gone down the
Who knows?
South Fork. Jerry Rhodey has done a lot of research on this, and he says apparently there was one person who was so opposed to the South Fork because of Confusion Hill, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, we know it didn't happen anyway, so.
it didn't happen, no. Okay, kids, shall we call it an afternoon?
Thank you.
You bet.
Great.